Hello, I'm Emma Desi, and welcome to another episode of Turning Readers into Writers. If you're brand new here, welcome, and here's what you need to know. This is a community that believes you are never too old to write your first novel. No matter what you've been up to until now, if you're ready to write your book, I'm ready to help you reach the end. I focus on helping you find the time and confidence to begin your writing journey, as well as the craft and skills you need to finish the book. Each week I interview debut authors, editors and industry experts to keep you motivated, inspired and educated on all things writing, editing and publishing. If you want to catch up, head on over to emmadesi.com where you'll find a wealth of information and tools to help you get started. Before we dive in, this week's episode is brought to you by my free cheat sheet, 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write. In this guide, I give you 30 ways that you can find time to write in the small gaps that appear between the various errands and tasks and responsibilities that you have in your day-to-day life. Now, you might be thinking that you don't have any time to spare, but I can guarantee these top tips will give you writing time you didn't think you had. If you thought writing always involved a pen and paper or a keyboard, think again. If you thought you needed at least an hour at a time to write your manuscript, I help you reframe that. You won't be disappointed. Get your free copy of 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write by going to emmadesi.com/30 Top Tips. Okay, let's dive in to today's episode. Hi everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Turning Readers into Writers. And following on with the Author Accelerator series from early in 2021, I'm continuing with my interview with Cheri Merz about imposter syndrome and how you can start to overcome that. Because we know absolutely that is something that everybody struggles with at some stage or another. So let me tell you a little bit about Cheri. Cheri is a 20-year serial entrepreneur who returned to her dream of a writing career after retirement. Today, with more than 30 indie published novels and one memoir behind her, Cheri's mission is to guide entrepreneurs to write the right book to attract their ideal audience. Because most have self-doubt about writing, publishing or marketing their books, Cheri works with her clients to remove the barriers and write the books that will establish authority, provide credibility and engage prospects organically. Bottom line, they confidently liberate the transformational message inside them and write and publish their books for impact and for income. And even though Cheri primarily works with entrepreneurs now, she did used to work with fiction writers. And regardless of what book you're writing or what genre it fits into, imposter syndrome, self-doubt, it impacts us all. So well worth a listen to Cheri's advice and thoughts on how to overcome those limiting beliefs. So let's delve in. Have you always been a writer and then moved into novel writing, or how did you come into the world of fiction?
Well, when you asked how have I always been a writer, I started to say no, but then you qualified it. How did I get into novel writing? So that was an interesting journey. I have always written. I was an English major in college, and I always thought about writing fiction. But I had a severe case of imposter syndrome, and I was not willing to show other people my work for business reasons. I wrote, I occasionally wrote stories that I didn't think were good enough to show anyone else, but mostly I wrote for business until I was 65 years old. So that's my first tip about imposter syndrome. Don't let it take you until you're 65 to realize you can write fiction.
But I think it's lovely as well because I've certainly seen comments from people on social media saying, I'm over 30, am I too old to start writing? And I think this is a wonderful example of how it's the joy of writing is that you're never, ever too old. It's
I plan to be writing until I die, and I don't plan to die until I'm at least 100. So,
Never too old. And I think it was author Mary Wesley. I think she wrote The Chamomile Lawn, and she published her first book, I think, at the age of 80. So it's open to all of us.
definitely is. Yes.
You started writing, and but you sort of saying that you let imposter syndrome sort of stopped you from doing it till a little bit later in life. But then once you got going, kind of what happened?
Well, so I was 65, and I was unable to find a job when we moved to a new city. And I'm not one for watching soap operas and eating bonbons. I had to have something to do, and I wanted to be paid for it, of course. So I put my resume on what is now Upwork and sought ghostwriting contracts. And my expectation was that I would be either writing or editing nonfiction, maybe blog posts, articles, that sort of thing. And I was hired by a gentleman who now lives in Australia, but who was raised in Namibia and whose first language was not English. I was hired to edit his nonfiction books, and then later we developed a collegial relationship that had me actually writing them for him. And then one day he Skyped me and said, "Let's write fiction." My first reaction was, "I can't write fiction." So there ensued an argument where I first gave the excuse that my dialogue wouldn't work. It would be too stiff because I speak rather formally. And that was a silly excuse. It came down to, do you want me to pay you to write something, or do you want me to find someone else? So I said, well, I'll try fiction.
If in doubt, ultimatums always work.
Right. So I began writing for him. It was a rocky start, but in January of 2014, I began writing a book for him, and at the same time writing a book for someone else who I'd been introduced to as a potential ghostwriter. And by the end of 2014, I had written a little over 850,000 words, comprising 10 novels, 8 of which were written under my own pen name. I guess I had a lot of words pent up behind that imposter syndrome. And by the time I started writing my own novels in the middle of that year, both of my clients had self-published the novels I wrote for them, and they were getting good reviews and good ratings. And it went a long way to, alleviate the imposter syndrome. I won't say it went away entirely. I was still afraid to submit my own work to an agent or to a publisher that accepted unagented manuscripts. But I was eventually persuaded to submit one of my novels to a contest held by my chapter of Romance Writers of America, and it got honorable mention. So I just kept going.
Publishing, was it your name on the books that you were ghostwriting, or your client's name?
When you're a ghostwriter, it's the client's name. And I had no problem with that. I still didn't want my name associated with it because I still didn't think they were good enough.
Okay.
And even when I published my own novels, it was my pen name, not my real name. My real name was a deeply held secret.
Was that again because of imposter syndrome, or because you just wanted to keep the sort of fiction and non-fiction side separate?
Kind of a combination. under my own pen name, I was writing rather spicy romance, and I have a young adult grandchildren that I didn't want to find my books under my name. Um, my children didn't want to read my books, my spicy romance books, so the pen name worked to keep that private.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about imposter syndrome. So for you, how did that manifest itself? What do you feel are kind of the key emotions or feelings or characteristics that signify this feeling of being an imposter?
So I'll misquote Meryl Streep,
Huh?
who described her feelings of imposter syndrome as the notion that someday someone would catch on to the fact that she really wasn't very good,
Mm-hmm.
that she'd be outed as someone who wasn't a good actress after all. So we all know that Meryl Streep is an extraordinary actress. It's the feeling, imposter syndrome is, as it's used today by lay people, is the feeling that you're just not good enough,
Mm-hmm.
that someone's going to find out that you're not good enough. And it leads to a lack of willingness to be exposed. In that's the reason a lot of people use pen names. Um, it's the same sort of thing that keeps Barbara Streisand uh, having stage fright after all these years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's often developed when you're a very young child, and it's usually an inadvertent misunderstanding of what a parent or a teacher has said. And it's very difficult to overcome because it usually starts before your reasoning part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, begins to develop, which doesn't
Mm-hmm.
happen until you're a young preteen or teenager. And it, it gets reinforced over and over as you make mistakes or whatever throughout your teen years. And your prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until you're in your mid-20s.
Right.
So
Okay.
as it gets reinforced, it becomes very, very difficult to root out the causes and overcome them. It's hard to overcome with logic something that your what they call the lizard brain, your core brain, has developed as a limiting belief.
Mm-hmm.
But
I see,
the
because
way
I
to
had thought
overcome
it
it,
was more of a logical thing that just as adults we become more self-conscious and more aware of sort of criticism of other people, and that's what stops us from trying these things out or feeling like we have the ability to do things. I didn't realize it was seeded right there kind of as a young child. I see.
yes,
So okay.
yes,
So that can, so for some people then who've had that and then it's been reinforced over time, so presumably then by the time they're fully grown, it can be more difficult, as you say, to understand what the root cause is and then to change it.
yes. There are ways to overcome it in the same way that affirmations work. You can reprogram your subconscious about limiting beliefs. There, coaching helps. Um, any number of ways help.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't necessarily cure, but you can also move past it. You can also say, okay, even though I don't believe this is good enough, it will have to do. And then having having those good reviews and ratings begin to help change your mind that it isn't good enough.
You
That's
self-published your own spicy romance.
I did self-publish that, and it actually sold rather well. However, when I decided that I needed a side gig to finance my writing, because I fully believe in professional editing, proofreading, cover design, etc., and I still wanted to contribute to the family income, I actually sold the rights to the 8 novels that I wrote under my pen names. So
Ah,
they have been published under someone else's pen name now, and I have been immersed in getting my courses and my coaching packages um, developed. I I'm in the process of revising a memoir that I wrote with my daughter, and I'll be republishing that under my own name. And then next year, I have a new series. I plan to rapid publish that, so I want to write at least 4 of those books before I publish them. So toward the end of next year, um, I will
you're
begin with my
prolific.
new pen name, but this time I won't hide. That pen name will be revealed as my pen name.
So you were telling us that it's something that tends to evolve in childhood, and then if it's reinforced, then it becomes stronger and stronger. And
Mm-hmm.
you've just gone on to tell us that, you know, there are ways of reprogramming your subconscious. There are ways that you can perhaps not eliminate it altogether, but you can start to move past it.
Yes, you have to move past it. I mean, I've seen statistics that 70% of the population has it, and a higher percentage for women than for men.
Ah,
So, um, considering that, uh, it's my belief, I may be wrong about this, but it's my belief that a higher percentage of women than men are now looking to self publish their work. Um, that puts us all at a disadvantage. It, it, it I mean, it stopped me from writing. I thought about writing from the time I was 8 or 9 years old and read my first adult, full-length novel. It was one of the classics. Um, I wanted to write the great American novel when I was probably 13 or 14. I didn't realize that that phrase was a joke. There's no such thing as the great American novel. But it just goes to show that I didn't know what I didn't know.
mm-hmm,
Uh,
mm-hmm.
what I
And
did know was that I wasn't good enough.
right. And so how might so I'm just kind of thinking about when you decided to put your resume up on Upwork and start looking for work there. So that presumably was to do sort of more non-fiction writing, which you were comfortable doing because you've done in your professional life.
Mm-hmm.
So I know this guy had to kind of bully you a little bit, give you an ultimatum to get you to do the fiction, but you said yes. And so how did that journey look for you? Had by that time you moved past a lot of your imposter syndrome, or now that you're
Not at
making
all.
fiction, was it still there?
I hadn't moved past it at all. Um, I thought I was getting away with something because he thought I wrote well.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That was actually a collaborative effort, and that helped some. Uh, he came up with the story ideas and wrote extensive, um, what he called outlines. What I called them was a very extended synopsis,
Okay.
but it was a fun journey for a while. He would give me an idea. I would start to write it. He would read it. Because he's in Australia, he's on the opposite time frame from me. So he would read it while I slept, make comments and edits, etc. And then the next day, I would read what he had done, make the changes that I agreed with, argue with him about those that I didn't agree with, and so it was a very collaborative effort. My second client just gave me a topic and sent me off to work on my own. So that was, oh, and by the way, I don't recommend writing 850,000 words in a year unless you're dictating, because I was writing for 12 hours a day. Uh, and, you know,
I don't
that was,
think I have the brain space to do that. I struggle sort of can't get past 2.5. Never mind, I'm exhausted after that. Wow, that's
yeah,
it's quite a feat. Absolutely amazing.
one in the
So
afternoon and my own in the evenings. So yeah, not good.
yeah.
Don't do that.
But doing that amount of work over the space of a year, did that help you with your imposter syndrome? What was it that was the kind of what? When was it for you that things started to change, and how did they change?
It was about 4 or 5 months into the year when I realized I was actually getting a lot of words out. It was flowing well. The books were doing well. And that's when I decided I wanted all of the money, all of the royalties. And that's when I decided to write my own books. I continued ghostwriting for, well, until June of that year. And in July, I stopped ghostwriting and wrote my own novels for a while. Um, in 2016, I had a bad year personally and ended up with writer's block on top of imposter syndrome. So I
Okay.
stopped writing my own books and went back to ghostwriting that year. So, I mean, things happen. Life happens, even to
Mhm.
writers. So, having imposter syndrome does not help you move past writer's block. I can say that for sure.
Did doing the ghostwriting help with the writer's block because it
It
was
did.
something else
It
idea?
taught me that I could write. It was just that my own stories weren't flowing.
I see. Okay. Ah, okay, cool. So, what advice then, I guess, what could you recommend to people watching this if they feel that there's something holding them back, that they're not stepping into their full potential in their writing life? What might you suggest to them as a way that they could start to do this kind of reprogramming that you mentioned earlier?
I did a lot of self-reflection to understand where it came from and to tell my adult mind this was a misconception. This was this was something that you shouldn't pay attention to now. So that although the emotion is still there, I can say, go away. This isn't real, and move past. But it did take understanding what caused it.
And so, did you sort of do some journaling around that, perhaps as part of that reflection?
Always journaling, some memoir, essays. Writing can be very cathartic. Even fiction can be cathartic because fiction can reflect your life mission or your purpose in life. But journaling is extremely powerful, and so is memoir.
Yes, journaling, I've certainly found that in my own life. Even if I don't do it every day, whenever there's something that is plaguing me, then being able to write it out, it's amazing what it kind of releases when you just aren't thinking about it too specifically, but more about kind of what's going on generally, and then out pops this either realization or the answer that you've been looking for.
Yes. And I find gratitude journaling helps a lot. Just naming what you're grateful for raises your emotional vibration, and that helps with the feeling that you're not good enough. I I use affirmation a lot. You have to be very careful about how you develop an affirmation. It has to be stated positively. It has to be stated as if it has already happened. So you can't use words like "I will." Um, so for an affirmation about imposter syndrome, it would be something along the lines of "I am a strong, capable, prolific writer whose work is enjoyed by all my readers." Off the top of my head, but it, like I say, in the present tense, and um, and in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
Your brain does not recognize negative words. That's why you should never say, don't forget. You should say, remind me. Don't say, don't let me forget. Say, remind me.
Oh, okay. I'm going to remember that. Yes.
Remember. Right. So another way to overcome imposter syndrome, if it's particularly strong, is coaching. You can explore your limiting beliefs with coaching. You can have an accountability partner with coaching, critique partners who can help you improve, but choose them carefully so that they're positive rather than negative. Positivity always, always. There there is no negative thing that helps with anything, in my opinion.
It's funny, I've been sort of talking about critique partners this week, and in fact we had a session last night about critique partners and the importance of it. Is that something that did you use in the past, or did you find when you were doing the ghostwriting and the co-writing that those people sort of acted as as critique partners, and that helped you in your journey?
My first client, he would say things like, add more action here. And I would say things like, a travel log does not belong in an action adventure novel. And so to be totally honest, he paid me to learn to write. The other thing I did was take craft classes, because when I began writing, I thought, I've read over 6,000 books in my life. I probably know what story consists of. But in fact, I was not structuring it properly in the beginning. Craft classes helped a lot.
And is that something in your coaching that you're able to do now, is kind of help people with craft, or is it more around the mindset that you do?
My coaching is more along the lines of mindset and productivity, workflow, the proper order of things to develop your book, your story. My process actually works for all categories of writing, not just fiction, because it has to do with learning who your readers are before you start writing the book, and researching what they expect, and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, but I talk about imposter syndrome. I don't feel qualified to teach craft.
We're always learning, aren't we, as we go along. It's one aspect of novel writing that it's like acting, actually. You never stop learning. There's always something new to discover, either in a character or in a form of storytelling or in the structure of the storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Yes, if you're not growing, you're stagnant, and your readers will soon determine that you've developed a formula.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not a good way to maintain your readers. But even in coaching and in the psychology world, coaches need coaches. Psychologists work under the tutelage. I'm losing my words. Supervision of other psychologists.
Mm-hmm.
And so writers need writers, even if writers need editors, absolutely.
Yes.
But writers need other writers for critique, for accountability, for collegiality. Um, our work is such a solo process while we're doing our first draft.
Mm-hmm.
We can get very insular and isolated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
with to be a writer with other writers is a joy and a privilege, and so necessary for our sanity.
Yes. And so you mentioned also kind of in the coaching side of it that can also help with imposter syndrome. And so what might be one or two of the ways that you would help a client sort of not master their syndrome, but start doing the reprogramming that I keep coming back to? Yes.
Right. Well, my first suggestion would be that they explore the reasons and that they look back to when they were 5 or 6 years old. That might require some memory techniques that memoirists use to uncover those memories that caused it in the first place. But then I would just, revisit it now and then to see how it's coming.
Mm-hmm.
And I would encourage people to journal around it and to do some self-development work that would lead them to at least be able to live with it and move past it, even if they haven't overcome it.
Okay, yeah. So the kind of living with it, just acknowledging that it's there, it's part of life, but it's not stopping you from doing something that you love doing and have a
Right.
dream for.
Exactly.
I'm curious, what might be one sort of memoir prompt that you might suggest to somebody?
Well, that's interesting because I've been studying memoir. Many of the people who have been attracted to my coaching have been aspiring memoirists.
Ah.
And so what I've discovered is that as you begin writing in detail one memory, if you allow yourself to sort of like you were talking about journaling, sort of journal the memory, start writing it out, and then go back and see if there's anything there that you could expand on. And what happens is it triggers other memories.
Okay.
So you can, well, in fact, if I may, a colleague and I are doing a virtual memoir writing retreat later this month. And she has a process by which she does writing prompts that you end up with a one-page outline of your first 10 chapters. And then we go into how to flesh those chapters out. And it's sort of the same process. You begin with a memory that isn't very detailed, and you dig deeply into that memory and find setting and the emotion of the memory and so forth. Very similar to writing a scene in fiction in layers.
Okay.
And as you do that, it triggers other memories, and it helps you go further back and further back and further back. So I have always thought that my first personal memory came when I was about 2.5 years old. And I was able to put that in the timeline because of what other people told me about the memory. So if you also still have people who lived through that time with you, you could interview them and say, what do you remember about this particular incident, if anything? And, every memory you have is still in your brain. It's just not as easy to access it when there are a lot of them. But going through these memoir prompts, what was your first memory of this particular issue? How long have you felt that way? When did you first feel that way? Are you sure that's when you first felt that way? In this memory, do you remember it being reinforced, or was there something else before that? And just trigger those memories until you reach the beginning, and you'll find that it occurred between 4 years old and 6 years old.
Gosh, it's fascinating. Okay. So by using those kind of questions that you mentioned, we can use those to dig deep and find out where this kind of imposter syndrome possibly originated,
Right.
and work forward. Oh.
For more prompts, Google memoir prompts. There are many that approach it from different angles. And
Okay, cool. So yeah, this is out there. So guys, if you're curious to know, you can go and find some good prompts out there and have a look. Well, Cheri, I'm just conscious of time. That's been fantastic. Thank you very much for giving us a little bit of insight there into how our limiting beliefs kind of formulate at such a young age, and then ways at the start of ways in which we can start to rewrite those beliefs. Now, if anybody is interested in learning a little bit more about your coaching business, and what's the best way for them to get to know, to find out?
Email me for my free discovery session link, and we can have a discussion about what would best serve them. If that's me, wonderful. If it's a craft course, I have some recommendations, and a half-hour discussion would certainly ferret out what would best serve them.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found that helpful and inspirational. Now, don't forget to come on over to Facebook and join my group, Turning Readers into Writers. It is especially for you if you are a beginner writer who is looking to write their first novel. If you join the group, you will also find a free cheat sheet there called 3 Secret Hacks to Write with Consistency. So go to emmadesi.com/turning readers into writers, hit join. Can't wait to see you in there. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.